the hippie movement was in California, and so Niklaus came from a trip from California, and he brought this hippie girl with him. Long hair till down here, and a long shirt, and very attractive girl, and he put this girl into my office. So we had two cultures that were somehow clashing. Here the Swiss culture, you know, and then here the hippie culture from California. And well, we had a nice time actually. We learned both from each other, you know. Thank you, Niklaus, for bringing this. And well, Kathleen then was a big help to Niklaus before this book, Pascal. And she not only ran all the program and corrected the mistakes, but she has also an excellent English, of course, and so that improved the book also. So I don't want to say more, and I give you now the word.
Okay, do I have this on correctly? You can hear me. Okay. Thank you very much, and it falls on me to give a more personal tribute to Niklaus Wirth today, and it's my great pleasure that I can do it. As Walter said, it was 1971 that I arrived here, and 80 years is a significant birthday, but I have to tell you, 43 years ago is a very long time ago. I was only 21 when I arrived here, and I also spoke no German. I had no friends or family here, and as Walter said, I was a bit of a California hippie. I don't know how many of you remember Zurich in 1971, but it was like the decade, and the time and place that had really defined who I was at that time just had not happened in Zurich. I had the pleasure of meeting Francois Sellier during this Professor Francois Sellier in this conference, and he gave me an explanation for that. A little bit of it.
No, it's
Got that? Got that? Okay, he gave me an explanation for this, and he said that there's a. Can you hear that? Okay. He said that there's a Swiss tale that explains this, and it says that if doomsday arrives, that the safest place to be is Switzerland, because everything happens 40 years later. So thank you, Francois. That really explains the impression of Zurich to me. Thank you. I have to just give you a couple of examples. I had a room on Lenzistrasse, and I used to walk down to Clausiusstrasse where our offices were. And as the trams would pass by, every face in those tram windows would stare at how I was dressed. Even when I learned to dress a little more conservatively, remember, I came from California, and so I really didn't have the great attire for the climate. And I remember buying my first pair of Bergschuhe, and I was so proud of them. And I wore them to work one day. And the face is on all of my colleagues' face. Yeah. I didn't know that hiking boots were something you only wore in the mountains, only when you're hiking. Now, as it turns out, about a week after I arrived, Wirth went to Stanford on a sabbatical. So I was unfortunate not to have the benefit of his guidance at that beginning. But I was very fortunate to share an office with Walter, and I will be forever thankful for the kindness and the patience of Walter and of his wife Heidi, because they took great patience in guiding me through that first year. And if you talk to Walter offline, he might share some of those stories with you. So my first challenge was trying to remember enough appropriate memories that I could share with you on this occasion. Now luckily when Wirth retired as professor, they compiled this book. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but it's called The School of Niklaus Wirth, The Art of Simplicity. And they asked many of us to contribute papers to it, and I contributed a very short paper. I think mine was the shortest of all the contributions. And I titled that paper Serendipity. And I titled it Serendipity because I thought that word reflected the good fortune I had of being at the right time, at the right place, not only for coming to Zurich and working with Niklaus Wirth, but also those years that I was in the computer industry were very exciting years for the computer industry. So I'm going to draw heavily on that paper for this talk, but one of my friends suggested I give the talk a subtitle for the purposes of this occasion. So for this occasion, it's Serendipity, or How I Became the Kathleen Jensen. So I have three themes, topics that I want to talk about. One, of course, is serendipity. And of course I have to talk a bit about the art of simplicity, but I always like to tie this with the importance of communication. And then just a brief observation of how this relates to bringing product to market. So first, when I think about Niklaus Wirth's influence on me, it actually started long before I met him and long before I even knew his name. I graduated, as I said, 1971 from the University of California at Santa Cruz. Now, Santa Cruz was a brand new campus. It was very experimental, very radical. It was a great place to be, especially in the humanities. It was very radical. But for some reason, and I forgot to ask them how this actually came about, we were also the first university, or maybe the first of 3 universities, to offer an undergraduate degree in computer science. Now I have to tell you that degree was a little bit chaotic because our professors were making it up as we went along, and each time we would come in here what the requirements were going to be. We started with an awful lot of theory. They didn't want to corrupt us with coding too soon, so we started with theory. The goal was to introduce us to the concepts of both hardware and software design. We were introduced to programming by Bill McKeeman. Now, I'm sure some of you have had professors and teachers like this in your career, but Bill was one of these people that had a passion for teaching and a really infectious enthusiasm that he brought to our classrooms. He also was convinced that this new world of computers was one where women could excel as well as men. And he was very proud of the fact that our graduating class was about half women, and to the best of my knowledge, all of us went on in careers in computing. Now besides, he introduced us to programming using a dialect of PL1 that had been stripped down specifically for teaching programming. Because we didn't learn coding, we learned about the concepts of programming, we learned about algorithms. He also taught us a lot about grammars. He introduced us to compilers, and of course he talked a lot about stack computers. Now some of this sounds familiar to you. That's because Bill McKeeman was Niklaus Wirth's first PhD student at Stanford. And that's why I say his influence was on me long before I ever met him. So when I graduated and wanted to go to Europe, I asked him if he knew anyone in Europe that he could write a recommendation for me. And he wrote a letter to Niklaus Wirth, and actually Wirth hired me sight unseen. I've often speculated how this came about. And one thing, there was an open position. And two, there was this serendipity. I think that Wirth felt a bit sentimental, because Bill McKeeman had been Wirth's first PhD student. I was in the first graduating class of this new degree at Santa Cruz, and so in a way I was like a grandchild. And it's this serendipity of what I call the grandchild effect that brought me to ETH. Now, I'm afraid that I lack the genius that could really continue with this tradition, but I did learn an awful lot from Wirth during those days. And of course, the first one has to be about the art of simplicity. I'm going to return to this theme of serendipity, but I want to just talk a little bit about the art of simplicity, and to me what this means also how I link it with the importance of communication. Now, in this paper, for this book, I wrote about Pascal, that it was elegant in its simplicity, rich in function, and without a hint of excess. I showed this paper to a friend of mine who's non-computer before coming here, and she said that it sounded like something the wine connoisseur might write. And that maybe I've been hanging around my husband too long, who's quite a wine buff. But I have to say that I thought that these words not only captured Pascal, but also captured Wirth's philosophy. Elegant in its simplicity, rich in function, without a hint of excess. You might notice one of the words I didn't use was subtle. And that's that if any of you who've been students of Niklaus Wirth may know that he was not subtle at all about his passion for eliminating excess. Just two examples of that. He mentioned just now that he felt the program should be written not for computers, but literature for humans. And he taught us that programs should be so clear that they should be self-documenting. Now, he actually provided a construct for writing comments in Pascal. But I have to tell you, if we use comments very much, he wasn't too pleased about that. Because if our programs were clearly and clear enough, if we've done our data structures, we shouldn't need to heavily comment. So when we showed him our programs, if we had comments in them, it usually meant we had to go back and rewrite them. Also, when it came time to write the user manual, the first dictate before I ever started writing the user manual was he thought it could clearly be documented in 100 pages or less. And actually, if you look at that first edition of the user manual and you discount the appendix and the chapter on the CDC implementation, it comes just under that 100 pages. So from there, I learned to strive for simplicity. And throughout my career, I think I got some of my greatest satisfaction when I was able to take a complex idea and distill it to its basic elements. But for me, I never could realize that sense of satisfaction until I was then able to communicate that to other people. I really enjoyed my teaching duties here, and so when Wirth asked me if I would write the Pascal user documentation, I was quite pleased to do so. And now I want to return to my theme of serendipity. We needed a more approachable user documentation because all that existed at the time was quite a terse yellow report. But he really couldn't assign this to any of the other assistants. I wasn't working on a PhD. I didn't even have the basic qualifications to work on a PhD. So all the other assistants were working on original research. So they couldn't very well ask them to take time out of their research to work on user documentation, because that couldn't be applied towards a PhD. So not only did I have the basic teaching experience, but very importantly, I had the time to do this. Now, what I did lack was writing for publication. So I would write a chapter, I would bring it to Derek for review, he would heavily edit it, I would go back, I would rewrite the chapter. I would bring you the next chapter. He'd heavily edit it, give it back to me, I'd go back and make the revisions. Now after doing this a few times, I decided it just wasn't honest putting my name as the author of this. So I listed Wirth as the co-author. But in keeping with the convention of the Institute at the time, I listed our names in alphabetical order. It just seemed logical. But the serendipity here is that as the fame of Pascal grew, my name became linked with Wirth's. And so while I was the most junior of his assistants, I became the best known of his assistants on Pascal. And that took my piece of serendipity for how I became the Kathleen Jensen of Jensen and Wirth. But there's a serious lesson here. And in the Institute at that time, we didn't do a lot of self-promotion. People didn't want to take time out of it, but even more importantly, it was almost considered a little bit vulgar. Something Americans might do, for instance. But I think Wirth knew instinctively that it was very important to get his ideas out to a wider audience. Now, as far as Pascal goes, the most important project that succeeded in doing this was the one you heard about today, the P compiler. Urs Alman implemented that P compiler, and that got Pascal out into the hands of many of whom were very good at promoting Pascal, and I have to say many of those people were Americans. So the message here is that simplicity, the art of simplicity, lends itself to effective communication, but I maintain that that job isn't done until your message is heard. And this example and others throughout my career has convinced me that if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it, it doesn't make a single sound. So my final thing that I'm going to talk about today is how this has an impact on bringing product to market. And the message here is very simple. It's people, not technology, that bring the product to market. Now, when I first started, I left ETH in 1974 and started working for digital. And the chain between our product and our customer was very short. Our customers were technically astute. They appreciated good design and good engineering, and they made their buying decision based upon those criteria. But as the computer industry grew and matured, that chain grew longer and longer and more complex. And in order to get your value statement down that chain and to hear the requirements coming up that chain, meant working with large teams of people, and across multi-disciplines. Disciplines such as sales and marketing, disciplines such as channels development, and partnership recruiting and management became essential for your success. And I think that in order to be successful and to make this your competitive advantage of managing these teams, you have to be very good at managing diversity, not only geographically, culturally, but very important across disciplines. You can't just talk to engineers, you've got to get your message across to your sales force, to your partners, to your channels. Now, I want to touch, Anne and I have talked about this, one aspect of managing diversity, and that's, as I look around forums like this, I'm afraid I see way, way too few women. So my request to you, to those of you who are in a position to bring more women into this field, to catch some of that enthusiasm that Bill McKeeman had that infected us, And please help bring more women into this field. It will pay off in managing diversity your competitive advantage. So, in conclusion, I would just say art of simplicity lends itself to effective communication, but your job isn't done until your message is heard. It's people, not technology, that brings product to market, and so you want to make valuing and managing diversity your competitive advantage. And third, I have to celebrate the serendipity that I've had. First is this grandchild effect that brought me here. The second is the serendipity of highlighting the user documentation that brought me this fame by association. And third, I want to, the serendipity that the rate of growth and change in the computer industry brought me an early and very enjoyable retirement. And so just to end on even more personal note, I want to say that Niklaus was always very tolerant, I think at times quite bemused by my California hippie ways. But more than that, I think he also sensed that I was at times very homesick. And he would invite me to his home. He introduced me to his family. He even used the pretext that it would be good for his children to practice their English so that I would babysit for him on occasion. But the Niklaus Wirth in the office was not always, it was terrifying at times. Now, I don't know if those years in between, if it's by maturing or his mellowing, but the Niklaus Wirth I know today is a very engaging human being, and I want to wish him a very happy birthday. Thank you.
Ja.